We are back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to discuss some more on Brandon Aiyuk. This contract negotiation has had a lot of twists and turns to it, and now I'd like to see some of what the 49ers insiders are saying because I assume they're the ones closest to the situation, always being around the team, obviously. So I thought it was interesting when NBC Sports Bay Area's 49ers insider Matt Maiocco, he brought up the idea of where he saw this extension being at right now and the probability of it being done. He believes that there's a 50-50 chance that an extension happens before week 1 in terms of what he's seen, what he's hearing on this situation, and just based on obviously everything we've seen on the national level with the posts on social media, the meetings that these guys had, his pivot interview, all those things wrapped into one. Still at 50-50, I think could be a little questionable because I see it a little bit more in favor of Aiyuk not re-signing. But I think 50-50 is as good as it gets really at this point. If you're an optimistic 49ers fan, I don't think you can go higher than that. And the main reason why he believes this is because of this idea of making a choice right now for the 49ers, a long-term choice to secure the future of this team based on what you decide, obviously, right? So one choice, you decide to buy in, you decide to invest in on Brandon Aiyuk, pay him what he's looking for, $30 million, maybe a little bit more, give or take a million or two, around the $30 million mark, a lot of money regardless, invested into Brandon Aiyuk for however long, 3-4 years, whatever it may be. You decide to go that way and buy in, having Brandon Aiyuk on that based on what he's earned, based on how well he has played, you give him that contract. But on the flip side of that, it could cost you some other players that Matt Maiocco brought up that are also in line for an extension real soon. Some of those guys are defensive back Deommodore Lenoir, Charvarius Ward, and linebacker Dre Greenlaw, and offensive guard Aaron Banks. All of them are getting closer to needing a contract extension, so it would be very beneficial for the 49ers to have that extra cap space to use on a variety of players rather than just one. But of course, on the flip side, you lose Brandon Aiyuk, you decide not to go that way, and now you have the money to pay these guys. But how much does that drop off? How much does that drop you in terms of talent and how talented this team is just overall, especially from an offensive standpoint when you have Aiyuk, Debo, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, obviously. You bring in Ricky Pearsall. This offense is looked at as a juggernaut. How many pegs does that drop them if they move on from Brandon Aiyuk? So that's really the conundrum that the 49ers are dealing with right now. Do they value, the whole, a more group idea of extending a lot more players or just keeping a very good, very talented wide receiver on their team? And it's also interesting if you look at other things that play into this because another factor that could have a big say in how this turns out is Debo's contract. He signed a 3-year, $71.5 million deal in 2022. So in 2022 he signed it. Now last year was the second year, and now 2024, by my calculations, would be the last year of this contract for Debo. So he's also in a contract year per se. So if you decide and agree with Brandon Aiyuk to play this year out on the 5th-year option, Debo's also on the last year of his contract. So technically you could decide in the future between keeping Brandon and keeping Debo at that point in time. But I don't think that's something the 49ers want to do, and having to decide between keeping one of these guys because that'll just get very ugly. Just not a good look for the 49ers if they decide between one of these guys. So I'm sure they want to avoid that, but that's something else to keep in mind if after this season, if they move on from Brandon Aiyuk, it could be in major part because they want to extend Debo, and they probably should extend Debo if they're going to move on from Brandon Aiyuk to another contract extension after that. And how much money does he get? And of course, that's going to stir up a lot more if he gets another lucrative deal and people start comparing it to Brandon Aiyuk regarding paying him instead of Debo. You know how the whole situation goes, but that's something to keep in mind. And not to mention that Brock Purdy, barring a first really bad season or a season where he performs not up to his standards. I expect him to perform great again. I expect them to make the divisional round at least, probably the NFC Championship game. And if he does all of that, say they get back to a Super Bowl, Brock Purdy is eligible for an extension next year, and there's already been a lot of talk by the 49ers CEO about Brock Purdy, how willing he is to pay him, saying it's a great problem to have. And it shows that you have a great quarterback and probably a great team if that's a problem that you are facing. So he seemed very willing to pay Brock Purdy at that point. And if he has another great year, you can expect him to easily make over $50 million. Maybe reset the market the way it's going right now and how these other extensions play out. He could be getting north of $51 million at least, in my opinion. So having that and having Aiyuk on another deal, maybe potentially extending Debo after that, it's a lot, and it's spreading the 49ers pretty thin to where they're just going to have to make a tough choice. They're prolonging it right now, negotiating with Aiyuk and negotiating these things, but it's going to come to a point where you don't want to do everything last minute. It's something that they have to consider now as they get closer to training camp. And Mayoko really summed it up in his statement that he said when he was going over the decisions that the 49ers have to make. He said, at some point, if your roster is full of really good players, you can't continue to pay market value. It just doesn't work. And he's completely right. That's the downside of having great players. If you hit the lottery on a lot of good players, no one's hit the lottery bigger than the 49ers drafting Mr. Irrelevant and having him be this franchise quarterback. You're not going to see something like that for a very long time, so you got lucky there. You drafted Debo, and he turned out to be an absolute stud. Same thing with Brandon Aiyuk, George Kittle as well. You were able to bring in Christian McCaffrey. This window right now for a Super Bowl is getting a little bit close now. It's getting a little bit tight, especially with Kyle Shanahan being 0-3 in Super Bowls. Now you're getting to a point where you're going to have to make these decisions, having to not pay market value and maybe losing some of these guys. Mayoko summed it up perfectly. You can't continue to do that because it just doesn't work. So now the conversation almost shifts off of this and how the 49ers move on and how long this, Super Bowl window is for the 49ers. If they've been there multiple times now they're starting to consider moving on from some of these players. And then what does that say about maybe a wasted Super Bowl window for the 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, and all of that stuff? It just opens up another whole box of questions surrounding the 49ers. So if by some way you can agree with Brandon Aiyuk to keep him this year and have him play on that fifth-year deal, I think the pressure just increases tenfold, really, for the 49ers to at least win a Super Bowl. It sounds crazy to say, at least win a Super Bowl, but I think we're at that point with the 49ers because they've been there so many times and they've arguably had the best team in the NFL for this period to not win a single Super Bowl. And now you're going to have to move on from some of your players. It would look like a big missed opportunity from their standpoint. Lisa DiLorenzo says, are you talking about some other year of running back rankings? No, I was talking about this year's. This year's, it just started coming out this week, actually. Mondays was running backs, I think. What's today? Wednesday? Tuesdays was defensive tackles, and today was the edge rushers. So that's what I was talking about. Gibbs is the number 2 running back in the NFL. Nick Chubb shouldn't even be on the list. Will he even play this year? I don't know how his recovery's going, Nick Chubb. I know his knee was pretty severe. That knee injury was pretty severe. I was watching that game, and it didn't look good at all. Gibbs as the number 2 in the NFL, you would have to convince me a little bit for that. I think I'd have a couple guys in front of him. He could get to that point, but right now I can't see Gibbs as number 2. I can't say he's number 2 in my opinion. But he could get there. I like what I saw. I just need to see it a little bit more often. But more on the 49ers now, just to close out this subject here, with how Brandon Aiyuk and how this could go in the next few weeks, if they do decide to agree on something or not. The 5th-year salary for Brandon Aiyuk right now is looking to be about $14 million for 2024. So with how low that is and how he's already been away from the team, if you can agree with Aiyuk to play it out like that, I probably wouldn't expect him to show up to training camp that often, or if at all, because I feel like he would already feel like he's doing them a favor by playing out this 5th year on a low salary at $14 million. So I don't think he would want to play or want to partake in training camp if he's already doing them a solid and playing on a $14 million salary. But also, it's not looking all bad for Aiyuk. He said he wants to stay with the 49ers ideally, but if you look at it from a financial standpoint, if he does put it off until next offseason, he plays this year on the 5th-year option, then you wait until next year and you decide to really extend with the 49ers, or you just come to an agreement similar to L'Jarius Sneed. The 49ers might franchise tag Aiyuk next year to prevent him from hitting the open market, and then you work out a tag and trade, sort of like the Chiefs did with L'Jarius Sneed. They get something at least back for him, and they don't completely just lose him in free agency. That's something that Matt Maiocco also predicted would happen. He said that he could see the 49ers having Aiyuk play this year on that 5th-year deal, then tag him and trade him next year as well. That's probably as ideal as it could get right now for the 49ers. And for Brandon Aiyuk, if it does happen next offseason, yeah, it stinks that you have to wait, but at the same time, say CeeDee Lamb gets paid or somebody else gets paid as well, you sort of increase your market value a little bit more if you go out there, perform like you did this year or even better, and then after that, say CeeDee Lamb gets extended, he resets the market again maybe, or just gets $35 million. It gives you another reason to sort of bump up that number a little bit more with your next team, so that's something else that could benefit him as well. But for right now, and a 49ers insider, Matt Maiocco, me, are thinking that this is no better than a 50-50 chance right now that an extension is done for Brandon Aiyuk. I would say it's a little bit lower than that, but it's a lot of factors that play into this now. You're starting to think long-term in a macro sort of way rather than just micro and thinking about what is he valued at? Should we just pay him that? It affects a lot more in terms of the makeup of this team and how good this 49ers team can be going forward, especially when we're talking Super Bowls. That's the goal right now for this 49ers team. They want to do that because of this Super Bowl window that they haven't taken advantage of. A decision like this could affect it a lot going forward in the future. So that's where it stands right now with Brandon Aiyuk. If there's anything else that happens, I will gladly talk about it on the show. But for right now, we're going to move on to another NFC team, this time being the Detroit Lions. Their star pass rusher, Aiden Hutchinson, talked about the expectations heading into 2024, all the hype that's been surrounding the Detroit Lions. Is it deserved? What are Aiden Hutchinson's thoughts on it? I will provide those when we return after this short break.